ticking clock.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode or another exciting episode of Hanging Out with Chops. This is Choppy Chops, your host, a recording engineer by trade. Like always, to all you first-time listeners, thank you for joining us. For all you guys that are back here for another round, thank you so much. I do appreciate you coming back and listening in to another episode. Whew. Guys, it's getting good. Episode 4, we're getting into the nitty-gritty now, the mixing part. In part 1, we covered pre-production, everything that should happen before you get here. Scheduling, budgeting, songwriting, demoing, rehearsing, all that good stuff. If we were building a house, I would consider that the blueprint portion of building the house. You know, you get the walls. I mean, I don't know anything about building houses, but I would imagine it's, you know, the walls, electrical, plumbing, windows, roofing, all that insulation, that kind of stuff. You know, you put it on paper and you got your blueprint for the house. That's pre-production. In episode 2, we covered the recording part of it, the laying it down. In essence, we're going to the hardware store and we're getting all the materials that we need, just like we came into the studio and we recorded all the material that we needed to throw down for the album. Part 3, we covered the editing. This is where we chop up the lumber, chop up the walls, get it ready for production, getting ready to put it all together. And now we're going to put the house together. Here's the mixing part. Now, mixing is probably the one aspect that everyone calls to mind when they think of mixing an album. You know, you see a guy in front of a console adjusting knobs and faders and raising volumes and lowering volumes and adding compression and EQ and all that good stuff. But in the last episode, we talked about the editing. Editing is where we take all the performances and we start to shape them. You take all the different takes we recorded, you might tighten the timing, work on the pitch, and we build the best performances possible. Once the editing is done, we move to the next stage, mixing. And this is where the record really starts to sound like a record. A lot of musicians think once the recording is done, the hard part is over. But honestly, mixing is where the entire picture comes together. This is where we take all those individual tracks and turn them into something that feels like one cohesive piece of music. What are we talking about? We're talking about mixing and mastering. Guys, let's get into this.
We're hanging out with Chops. Time just never stops. Answers fade like drops on a broken ticking clock.
All right, so we're going to start the mix. A lot of times, I'd like to take a break from actually recording and editing to the actual mix. I do want to come in with some fresh ears. So a lot of times, you know, we do finish recording and the bands are like, all right, we're going to start the mix. And I'm like, no, we've been going at this for days. Our ears are shot, you know. Let's give our ears a little break and let's come in with some fresh ears and let's hit this project. Now, this might be different for a lot of people, but what I'm going to cover is my basic approach to a lot of the work that gets done here. Now, not every single project is the same. There is no like cookie cutter approach. Projects are different. You know, you may mix a jazz album different than what you might mix a Latin album to, or you might mix a rock album to. But I would say this is like some overall standards that I would consider when it comes down to mixing. The first thing I do when it comes to mixing is not the EQing, is not compression. I start with the routing. Basic organization. Let's organize. We had everything first organized for capture. Now let's reorganize for mixing. So I'm going to start with drums as an example. Drums get crazy. We may have 14, 16, 20, 24, 30 tracks. So we need to get control of these. And for example, I'm going to go with drums. Let's say kick. I'm probably going to have on one track kick in, which is the microphone in the kick drum. On the second track, I might have kick out, microphone outside the bass drum. I might have kick samples. Maybe we added specific samples, maybe some 808s or some other kind of kick sample that we wanted. That might be on a third track. Fourth one might be perhaps some sound replacement that got done. So now we see 4 existing kick tracks. At this point, what I want to do is I'm going to bust down these 4 existing bass drum tracks into one stereo track. It's easier to control. It's easier to manage. For some of you that may not know what busing is, one of the great examples I like to use is imagine a bunch of kids walking to school. Imagine, let's first say, for example, these are kids, and we got 14, 16, 20 kids walking to school. Well, I can get them all there easier and more efficiently if I put them in a bus. So I grab the kids, put them in a bus. Now they're all going to the same place. And much like if they were all in a bus, I can get the bus there faster, I can get the bus there slower. Much like audio through a bus route, I can turn up the bus, lower the bus. It basically takes a whole bunch of multi-sources down to one source. So that's what busing would be. I know, I can see some of you guys rolling your eyes. I know a lot of you probably already know this, but there's also probably some cats listening to this that may not know what we're talking about. So I just want to bring everybody up to speed. So all the kicks down to one kick bus. Makes sense. Same thing with snare. On snare, we may have the standard snare that we used. So we're going to have on a separate track, on one track, we might have the top of the snare, which you can imagine what it would be, a mic on top of the snare, a mic on the bottom of the snare. Depending on how involved it gets, we might put like a crotch mic. That's kind of like a mic in between the snare and the hi-hat area, or between the snare and the bass drum area. You know, you want to catch a lot of snare, but you also want to catch a kit body, some body of the sound. And then same thing if we had maybe snare samples that we added. So now we're talking 3, 4 snare tracks, and that would be just the first snare. Now if he has additional snares, perhaps a piccolo snare that he holds out to the side, a popcorn snare that he might have. Same thing, that might get mic'd on the top and the bottom, or maybe just the top. But regardless, now we're talking about our actual snare tracks are going to be 2, 4, 6, sometimes maybe even 8 lines. Same thing with the snare. We want to bus all those down to one bus. Same thing with toms. You might have 2 toms, 3 toms, 4 toms, 5 toms. Same thing. You may have top of them mic only or top and bottom, but you also want to take all those and bust those down. So far, kick bus, snare bus, tom bus, and then I like to take all my high frequency ones, hi-hats, ride, bell of ride, put those on a separate bus. Now, overheads, room mics, that kind of stuff, I tend not to bust those because they were recorded mono, and there's a couple of them. I'll pad those out later the way I feel I need the space. So I might keep those mono. Now all these existing buses, kick bus, snare bus, tom bus, high frequency bus, so on and so forth, all those buses get bussed down to now one single drum bus. So hey, now we have all of these multi-tracks down into sub-tracks down to one master bus track. Now where this comes in really handy for some of you that may not have a lot of processing power, maybe you don't have processing power to put 14 compressors. Now we'll save you some CPU power by perhaps assigning, for example, reverb or compression or EQing to one bus versus every single individual tracks. But for me, obviously, I handle each track. So my kick in would probably still have its own EQ, its own compression, maybe limiter, that kind of stuff. And then the kick bus might also have maybe an additional EQ. And then at the very end, the actual drum bus might have some additional stuff. By the time you get to your drum bus, though, you do have one cohesive track that when you do add compression to, it tends to glue that better into one nice track. Now let's discuss the workflow of the project. The entire album lives inside one big session. Every song, every track, everything, it's all in one huge session. Now that session gets big, but there's a reason I do it that way. Consistency, guys. Consistency is the name of the game. If I adjust the kick drum sound, that change affects every song now. If the snare needs a little more crack or a little more body, that adjustment doesn't just happen now in one song. It happens across the entire album. It helps the record feel cohesive. An album should sound like a body of work, not 10 different mixes that happen to sit on the same record. Now, of course, sometimes a song needs something different. Maybe the arrangement is different, maybe the vibe is a little different, but I'll make small adjustments. Or more importantly, I'll make specific adjustments. But I'm starting from one big session keeps the sonic identity of the album intact. So once I get everything routed correctly, as far as bussing, or I bring the mixing down to more manageable tracks, once it's all organized, the actual mixing starts. I like to do the bottom-up approach. It's not something unique to me. I would imagine the majority of people do this. I start with the drums. I want to establish the groove. I want to establish the energy. There's one important thing, though, that I do. Even though I'm starting with the drums, I always like to keep my vocal on. I always keep the vocal playing while I'm mixing the drums, because I want to hear the relationship between the two. Even though the drums is creating the groove, really and honestly, the vocal line is what's carrying the story. And those two things, they have to work together. If the drums are too aggressive, they'll start stepping on the vocal. If the drums are too soft, the song will start to lose energy. So even when I'm focusing on the drums, I'm constantly listening to how the vocal sits against them. Because most listeners connect with two things first: the groove and the voice. Once the drums start to feel right, the next instrument I bring in is probably what you would guess would be the bass. Now we're setting the foundation of the record, because now we're dealing with a relationship between the kick drum and the bass line. And this relationship is really everything. The way I think about it is pretty simple. I don't necessarily want to hear the kick drum too much, but I do want to feel the kick drum. What I do want to hear is the bass lines. I like to say I want to hear the bass notes, and more if I want to feel the kick. The bass carries the musical information down there. The kick provides the impact. When those two lock together properly, the entire record starts to feel solid. This is where the fundamentals of the mix begin. And when those two fundamentals are properly aligned, that's when it starts happening. The overtones start to line up. Suddenly the mix feels stable. When the drums don't drop out, and the drums don't get louder, and the bass doesn't disappear on you, or the bass gets louder. When it's nice and solid, you can always hear the bass, you can always hear the drums. They're not in your face, but they're always present and easily hearable. You don't have to dig for them. That's when you know you got a good spot for them. Every now and then I'll do some tricks. I'm more sure a lot of you listening to this will probably want to pick tricks out more than anything else. So here's one trick that I do. I like to reinforce the tonic of it. So sometimes I'll sneak in like a signal tone generator that's set to the 1 of the song. And I'll let it open and close when the kick hits. Now it's not present. You probably don't even hear it, but you definitely feel it. You can definitely feel the room vibrate for a split second. That the kick might have that hitting you in the chest thickness, that low subtone generator. That's what makes the room vibrate. You won't hear it, but you'll definitely feel it. And reinforces the root of the music every time the kick lands. And that's a little trick that I like to use. Kind of adds a little glue on the low end. Helps keep it together. Once the rhythm section starts to feel solid, the next step is stereo imaging. Up to this point, I probably should have mentioned this earlier. I like to start my mix in mono because I really want to get volume levels really well first before I start to spread out and demand some elbow room. But once I leave my mono mix and I go back to a stereo mix, the center stays the same, pretty simple. Kick drum, bass, straight up center, with my vocal straight up center. That's kind of where the core of it sits. But then I start to open up the drums. I spread out my toms. Hi-hat moves out a little bit. You widen the spread with your overheads, how far you place them left, how far you place them right. Now the drums start to feel like they're sitting in the space. Once I got that locked down, then I start to bring in other instruments. Start to bring in guitars, keyboards. There's a lot of ways to approach this, but the goal in my mind is the same. Every instrument should have its own space. For example, if I have an electric guitar and an acoustic guitar, I might pan the electric guitar to the left, but then pan the effects of that same electric guitar to the right. Now I'm not doing hard panning. These are going to be stereo tracks. So I might go majority to the left on my electric guitar, but still, you can still hear the dryness on the right side, just not a lot. And same thing with the effects. You might hear the majority of it on the opposite side, but you're still going to hear a little bit on the right side. Now the instrument and its ambience create a wider spread across the mix. And the same thing happens with the acoustic guitars. I might throw the opposing acoustic guitar to the right with its effects on the left. Starts to create a nice balance. That also starts to happen with keyboards. For example, I have piano tracks and organ tracks. Then I might have the piano on one side with its effect on the other, and then the organ on the opposing side with its effect on the other side. The mix will really start to open up. And when the instruments have their own space, everything becomes a lot easier to hear. And now that works the same if I have, for example, electric guitar and keys, or acoustic guitar and organ. Let's say I only have guitar and keys. Well, I might put my guitar leads straight up center, but I might throw my rhythm guitar parts on my left and my opposing keyboard parts on the right. I want to make sure it's well balanced. Not just volume-wise, but where they're actually being represented on your spectrum. Now, I'm sure people sometimes ask when EQing and compression comes to play. I adjust EQing and compression from the very beginning. I don't start compressing or EQing now. I've actually started from the very, very get-go, from when we were doing our production tracks. Now I start really fine-tuning them now. If the kick drum had too much low end, it might feel louder than what it really is. And if the bass is too mid-rangey, it might step on the vocals. So now is when I start really fine-tuning. Sometimes the right EQ fixes what sounds like a level problem. Compression works the same way. Sometimes compression isn't about making something louder. It's about controlling how the instrument sits in the mix. Again, the bass, for an example, might jump out on certain notes. Compression helps smooth all that out, making sure that it sits at a very even level throughout the track. Vocals always involve compression, not to squash the performance per se, but to help the vocals stay present as the song moves along. Mixing becomes a constant process of small adjustments. Now, for those small adjustments, automation comes into play. Now, I handle automation a little bit different. I try to break down my automation into two categories. I like to leave my drawn out, like literally draw with pencil, that kind of drawn out automation. I leave that for the stuff that needs more fine tuning. When it comes down to that, I might perhaps automate my reverbs, my delays, when to turn them off, when to turn them on, Moments where the delay appears at the end of a vocal phrase. Automation really works here. Also, some delays, some reverbs. They have like an A and a B, allowing you to run, for example, 2 different delays, 2 different EQs, 2 different compressions on one plugin. That's a great time to automate. Hey, I want EQ A on verse, especially if you don't have a lot of processing power. You might have EQ A on this section, but it may need to cut through a little more, so you might switch to EQ B of that same one plugin. You're not doing it as a second plugin. You're merely asking that plugin to adjust now and move certain parameters of its settings. Automation is great for that. Now for volume automation, that's a little different. Because volume is so subjective along the lines of us building the mix. The client may be like, hey, can you raise the guitar here? Can you lower it there? And honestly, drawing and erasing and redrawing and erasing and redrawing the automation just drives me batty. It probably drives you crazy too. But because I have a mountain of CPU and I have a mountain of RAM, I can really do an endless amount of tracks. So that's what I'll do. I'll use a whole lot of multiple tracks. So for example, if a guitar needs different levels during the section of a song, I might create different guitar tracks for that same song. Perhaps a verse track, a chorus track, and a bridge track. With the modern systems we have nowadays, the tracks are plenty. And sometimes it's easier to manage the dynamics rather than constantly having to rewrite automation over and over. And it's as simple as it sounds. Sometimes I'll have a mid-volume track, let's say a acoustic rhythm part. I might have a mid-level volume and then like a high-level volume. Same track, but I'll cut it up because during, the verses, the volume is playing, that sounds great. But during the chorus, he may get drowned out and my ear has to dig for him or her because I can't hear them anymore. Well, that's fine. I just take the existing audio content and I move it down to what I would consider my loud track. Okay, there you go. Now it's easy. Plus, it's a lot easier with fade-ins and fade-outs. It's really quick. I can create my fade-in, fade-outs on the actual audio itself versus having to automate every single time. Oh, now it's too short. Oh, it faded out too quick. I wish it would have lasted a little longer. It's a lot easier to take the fade-ins off, fade-ins on, and put them back in. I know, guys, it's a lot. Especially it's a lot to cover without you actually seeing it. With the fact that I'm just verbally discussing it, it gets kind of challenging. Oh, man. And then on a whole other note, you also have to respect the artist's identity. If the artist already has a long catalog, you sometimes have to listen to those the older albums that they did. Especially if they have like a signature sound, you have to respect that sound. I know it's a crazy example, and I wish we were fortunate enough, but let's say you got Van Halen to come in. You think you could ignore the way Alex drums have sounded for the past decades, and you want to try to put your own spin on it? No. You'd have to really pay respects to the way all those albums before you got mixed, and you want to keep that integrity. Now, if you're working with a brand new band, it's different. Then you're helping create their sound. But when an artist has history, you gotta respect the tradition. A lot of it comes to taste, your palate as an engineer, knowing when to innovate, and when to honor what already works. Now we got our drums, bass locked in, got our keys locked in, guitars, maybe some percussion going. Now start working on vocals, background vocals. Now at this point, I like to finish one song to the end. I'm talking about fade in, fade outs, perfect. This is what it's gonna sound on the radio. Then I let the band sit with it. Guys, listen to it. What do you think? They might come back and say, hey, I really would like the snare to sit a little more subtle in the mix. It's too up front. Fine. The guitar, I like this. Vocals might be, hey, dude, they're perfect, leave them alone. But once we're all in agreement, and it's not going to be that day, I do prefer for them to take it and maybe listen to it for a couple of days and get back to me. Once they say, hey, that's it, that's the mix, that becomes my template now. That's what I'll mix the rest of the album to. Earlier, the whole album lived inside one gigantic session. But now that I have the first template done, now we're gonna break the album into subfolders, what I would call mix sessions. Song 1 gets its own mix session. Song 2 gets its own one. Song 3, all the way through the entire record. There's not gonna be a lot of changes, guys. The drums, bass, guitar relationships across the album are gonna be pretty close. So now we're just doing some tweaking here and there. Now we gotta think about the mastering of the album. While I'm mixing it, I already have a mastering chain on my master bus. It'll usually include a couple of compressors, an EQ or two, maybe a stereo field widener, some kind of LUF meter, LUFS meter, so I can see how loud my mix is getting. The reason I do this is because I want to hear how the mix will behave once it's mastered. So I have all my mastering plugins on my main mix bus while I'm mixing it. Once I'm done and I'm ready to bounce out the mix, I disable everything in my mastering chain. Every single plugin gets turned off. Now the mix gets exported completely dry, free of anything on the master bus. I take all those finished songs and now I open up a new session, mastering session. Each finished mix becomes its own track now. And now the same mastering chain that I used across the entire session, now I put that chain on every single track. And again, I start to make small adjustments. A little less EQ in here, a little more EQ in there. Maybe a slight compression. Maybe adjusting the loudness so one song sits properly next to the next one. The mastering portion of it is where you bring the whole. Think of it this way. Mixing would be you're getting your dinner together. You got your salad on one plate, your main steak on one, mashed potatoes on the other one. You know, you got everything that's going to make up the meal in different plates. When you take it to mastering, you're taking it to the table. You know, your steak can't be cold. Your salad can't be warm. In a way, everything has to be presentable. And that's what you're doing in the mastering. Every single dish now is a meal. Now you're taking it all together. I hope analogies work great for me, guys. So I'm hoping these analogies work for y'all. So during the mastering session, I will hear a little bit of song 1, a little bit of song 7, a little bit of song 2, a little bit of song 8, a little bit of, you know, our template song, and then the rest of them. And I start to adjust levels, making sure that all of them are the same level. Once I feel pretty comfortable with them, and I get ready to finally export the finished album, I like to do 3 volumes. Maybe a -8 LUFS, -12, maybe a -14. Especially now for uploading, whether it's Pandora or Spotify or YouTube or Deezer or whatever your digital platform you're uploading to. Not all of them take the same one. Some of them will prefer a hotter mix. Some of them prefer a mix that's not so loud. So it's good to have, I would say, a good, better, best in loudness mixes. So when we turn albums in here, that's what we do. We turn them in, usually at 2 different, we might do like a -8, -14. That seems to cover all the grounds. But if you want to be a little more specific, you might want to do a -8, -10, -12. But for us, a -8, -14 seems to work out pretty good. The question I do get a lot is, when do you know that the mix is finished? And I'm going to give you the most honest answer I can give you. It's never finished. You just make your peace with it. You could keep working on the mix forever. You could keep making tiny little adjustments for the next 10 years. But much like everything else, the mixing has parameters. There's a schedule. There's a budget. And at some point, you have to step back and say, given the time we had, given the resources that we had, given the availabilities that we were given, this is the best version of this record we can make. Then you let it go. Then you send it out into the world and you move on to the next project. When the album is finally finished, the mix is done, the mastering is done, there's really one thing I want the listener or the client to feel. I want them to feel like the record will stand the test of time. Because you never know what this album is going to represent. This might be the one and only album that they ever make. I don't know. Sometimes it could be album 20 in a 50 album career. But every album deserves the same care. Every album deserves the chance to stand on its own. Something someone can listen to from beginning to the end and truly enjoy. Because once the record leaves the studio, it becomes part of history. And our job is to give that music the best chance possible to outlive us all. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. This ends part 4. I know we covered a lot, and quite honestly, I wish a lot of you were just sitting here with me while I'm doing the mix, because there's a lot of other subtle stuff that I'm doing that's really hard to verbally tell you all, because, you kind of have to be here with me. But on the next one, I want to do one last part of this. We'll call the next one part 5. Everything I should have mentioned, or everything I forgot. Because as we've been going along, every now and then, a little light bulb turns on top of my head, and I'm like, hey, I should have also mentioned this. So I'll gather all my thoughts, and I'll throw it on the very last one, and we'll call it, by the way. Or, hey, maybe I forgot to mention this. Whatever. Guys, like always, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I get such a kick talking about this stuff. Even though I do this every day, it's a little different to actually try to verbalize everything that I do. So I hope this helps you all. And if not, maybe you're not even engineers. But maybe it's a good story. Like always, if you want to help keep the ball rolling, please consider sponsoring the show. There's a support the show tab or button at the front page of this podcast. Every dollar goes towards the show. Let's keep the ball rolling. All right, guys, that concludes this episode. I'll catch you on the next one. We'll wrap up everything I forgot. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for hanging out with me.
We're hanging out with Chops. Time just never stops. Answers fade like drops on a broken ticking clock.